The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
So this elderly woman from the Bronx books this plane, flies to Southeast Asia. And she gets to Southeast Asia and she transfers on this train that takes her back into the jungles and the mountains. And from there she has to take this little rickety bus that goes up to the base of a mountain. And from there she has to ride a little donkey cart that takes her far back into this remote ashram. So it's a journey of days, just arduous travel. And she gets to this remote ashram and she asks to speak to the guru. And she finds out that the guru is in silence. And so she has to wait. And so she waits in this very simple, somewhat arduous lifestyle. And finally, they say, the guru he's staying in meditation. She said, I have to speak to him. So it's impossible. He's in silence. He's meditating. And she says, I only have 3 words to say to him. And so they all confer. And they say, okay. So she walks into his room, and there's the guru sitting stone still in meditation. And she comes up to him and she says, Sheldon, come home. So Sheldon was on a journey, and so was she. I'd like to talk a little bit about the journey of the Buddha, which is really the hero's journey, and offer just some reflections on how it might reflect on your journey. Whenever there's a sense of something needs to change, you're initiating stages of the hero's journey. It can be helpful to recognize these stages and to sense how to be with them as you move forward in your life. So the first of these is the call, honoring the call that brings you forward. The second stage is entering into the unknown and all the trials that ensue from moving into your journey. The third is the attainment, in the case of the Buddha, the attainment of enlightenment. And then the fourth is the return. How do you live your life from a place of having attained what you most want? The call that we experience to wake up is usually born out of a tragedy, of something gone horribly wrong. The story of the Buddha, many of us know. You've read any books or seen any of the movies, and we know now from archaeology that the Buddha did look exactly like Keanu Reeves, if you've seen that movie. The Buddha was born in luxury. He lived a very protected life. His father was told by a great seer, a great astrologer, that he would either be a king or he'd be a spiritual teacher. And his father really preferred A rather than B. And so he did everything he could to protect him from seeing anything painful. So he was indulged, every sense pleasure was fulfilled. He was protected from the outside world, and for many years he was very much in a kind of a slumber of engaging into the sense world, in the pleasures. There are many, many stories, and there's sort of a mythology, of course, about the Buddha's life. But one of the versions is that he had just sort of like overdosed on on indulging and just sort of needed some air. So he asked the chariot driver, which would sort of be like the castle limo driver, to take him outside the compound. And on this travel, he saw an old man with losing teeth and without hair, and he was struck by that. And he asked his driver. He said, "Does this happen to everyone?" And the driver said, "Yes, everyone. Everyone gets old." And he had never seen that, and it deeply impacted him. And so he became very curious about the outside world, and he would make these ventures out there. And another day he came across someone who was horribly sick, just absolutely in a state of total breakdown. And again, he said, "Does this happen to everyone?" And he said, "Yes, everyone. Everyone gets sick." Another time he saw a corpse. And he said, "Does everyone go through this? Does everyone die?" He said, "Yes, everyone, without exception, dies." And he was so overcome by seeing sickness, old age, and death, and how everyone is subject to that. The next time he was out, he saw a monk. He saw a sannyasi, a renunciate, just a very simple man with robes and a bowl, and he seemed very, very happy. And the Buddha called him over. They had this very powerful conversation, and he experienced someone who, in the midst of this world of suffering, of sickness, old age, and death, who had a quality of radiance about him. And that was his call. That's when he realized there is something beyond indulging in senses. There's something beyond. What is it that lives beyond sickness, old age, and death? That inquiry became very, very deep inside of him. In that same way, every one of us has some call to action. Something shakes us. Something wakes us up. I would imagine that for many of us, the experience of death is something that is quite profound. The realization that you too will die, and that everyone will die in no particular order, brings about a certain urgency. I've always been struck by how, as friends and family have died, there's this deeply shaken sense of reprioritizing what's most important. And then I'm also aware of how that fades over time. But for the Buddha, this was very, very important to him. We all have a need to belong. We have a need to be part of something. And our primary caretakers, our culture instills certain beliefs on us. It says, if you do these things, you'll be okay. You'll be part of the clan. Do these things, don't do these things, and you'll belong. And so we set out early in life to find out where do we fit, where we still belong. As I think as Tom Peters in his book In Search of Excellence said, everyone wants to belong, and at the same time, everyone wants to stand out. We want to belong, but we want to be special. And there are kind of conflicting energies there. So we get driven in our lives to succeed in this world where we still belong. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. There's a sense of living our lives as they're sort of programmed through the expectations that are implanted in us through our primary caretakers and our culture. A good friend told me once how he drove up to his new McMansion that he had just bought in his sports car. And as he drove up, he thought, finally, this is going to show the old man I've arrived. And he realized, wait a minute, he's been dead for 6 years. You know, those deep, deep drives that we have. So there's certain calls to action. There's sort of the big one, like, what's most important in my life? And sometimes it's a sense of like, even like, I need to get in shape. You know, we realize, I need to do something that's going to create a shift, taking me toward what I most want. So the call can be big, the call can be just those deep motivations. There's something I need to do, something needs to change. So then we move into the unknown, and we move into the trials of life journey. And the Buddha felt this call to action, but it still wasn't easy. He had comfort, he was married, he had a child. And the texts really emphasize this point, that even though he was called to go and renounce the world and engage in the spiritual practice, all the texts say that he couldn't resist taking a last look at his wife and at his son. It wasn't just, I need to do this and walk out the door. There was a letting go. There was a human connection. And in that same way, whenever you have made your biggest life choices, when you say yes to something, you always saying no to something else. I remember when I was sort of torn about getting married, and a wise friend of mine said, if you marry this person, you will always wonder if there was someone else. If you don't marry this person, you will always wonder, was she the one? You know, we never really know, but we take that step forward. I love this quote. The goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature. And that became the Buddha's impulse, to match his heartbeat with the heartbeat of the universe, to find out what is true. What is the nature of reality? And so he started his journey, and the journey begins always with the first step. In his case, it was stepping into the practices of his time, which were practices of asceticism. The practice of yoga in the Buddha's time had nothing to do with spandex or yoga classes or downward dogs. It was the opposite of what he had lived. Rather than indulging into the senses and satisfying every desire, it was about transcending through denial, transcending through going beyond the senses. So part of the practice at that time was to go without food for periods of time, to push the body to extremes, to meditate, in the cold without clothes. And part of the idea is that you would have these moments of transcendent of the body. And the analogy, which I know I've shared before, the best one I can think of is if you think of like the Sundance ceremonies in the Native American tradition, where they do the piercings, where they pierce their skin and it's tied with a leather thong to a tree limb, and there's sort of this ecstatic dance and there's this release. So you have these transcendent moments. And he noticed through exploring this realm that he was having experiences, but they weren't liberating. At one point he started to fast, where he was sort of denying his body food. And there's a point where when you sort of withdraw from food and you practice meditation, the mind gets very, very clear. It's a powerful practice. But and one of the myths says that he went each day eating 1 grain of rice less until there was no rice, and he passed out. He lost consciousness out of pure weakness, and you may have seen the statues of the Buddha where his ribs are exposed, and that's the phase of his practice, a practice of asceticism, of denial. When he sort of came to, there was a young woman carrying milk from another caste, and she offered him some milk, and he accepted it, and started to revive him and nourish him. And those who were observing him chastised him for accepting food from someone from another caste. Not only, they claimed, did he break his practice of austerity, but he also broke convention. And this was a turning point in the Buddha's life. First was the recognition of what he called the middle way, about awakening does not occur through indulging the senses, nor does it come from denying the senses. And the analogy he came up with is imagining you're tuning the string of a guitar. If it's too tight, the sound will be sharp. If it's too loose, the sound will be flat. So the practice of the path actually is that fine-tuning of that string. Not too tight, not too loose. It's a very beautiful way to practice meditation. When you realize I'm a little too wound up, maybe I need to relax. Or you're so relaxed, the mind is so spacious, maybe you need to tighten it up a little bit to find that sweet spot. The second element of that stage of his awakening was realizing that for him in that moment, receiving the milk, receiving the nourishment from someone from another caste was perfect and pure. And to have this sort of outside authority saying that was not appropriate sparked a realization that he was never going to find the deepest answers externally. That what he really sought was an authority inside. So we so often focus on the externals for approval. We focus on the externals to tell us what the next thing to do is. But an important part of our life and any journey is to access the deep inner knowing. There's a phrase that says, finding your dharma is your dharma. Like finding your path is your path. The Buddha said, find out what works for you and then give yourself to it fully. So the other way, when I talk with people saying, I don't know what to do with my life now. I oftentimes think of your dharma, like your work in the world, it's what you can't not do. When you really get down to it, it's what you can't not do. It's something that just naturally comes, a natural expression. But finding that space is part of the path. When you really want something, there's usually a payment for it. As a friend of mine says, figure out what you really, really want, and then ask yourself what you're willing to let go of in order to get that. And the most successful people have found a way to let fall away what doesn't serve their most important thing. A good friend of mine who has spent thousands of dollars and lots of time going to entrepreneurial trainings, he said, let me save you some money. He said, this is what it comes down to. Figure out what you do best and don't do anything else. It's really kind of an exquisite little teaching there. Figure out what you do best and don't do anything else. So, as we settle into the kind of the trial phase of our life, when you really want something, there will never inevitably be resistance, there will be challenges, and there's a perseverance that's required. One of the fundamental teachings in yoga philosophy is the teaching around the importance of what are called the yamas and the niyamas, which are the observances and the restraints. It can be very, very helpful to ask, what am I willing to do to move toward my goal? What are the practices, what are the habits, what are the rituals, what are all the support systems that I need that are going to move me forward? And then the second part of that is, what are you no longer willing to do in order to move forward? What will you not do that would be supportive? And getting that clear can be very, very helpful. When I lived in the ashram, I was in an ashram for a couple decades, and we would do our morning practices really early, like 5 or something like that. I've kind of blocked it out, but it was really early. And I remember our teacher said, one of the advantages of getting up early for your practice in the morning, it's not so much the benefit of the practice, it's about all the trouble you didn't get into because you went to bed early the night before. So there's something to that. So when you really want something, there's a payment. There's effort and all that you've accomplished in your life, whatever it may be, in education and moving your career forward, you have sacrificed for it. You've hit walls and moved through them. So the Buddha was called to continue in his practice. He practiced arduously. He taught, or he learned from everyone who would teach, to hear what they had to say, to try on different techniques. And he described it as swimming upstream. That when you have a desire to cultivate non-judging awareness, you are swimming upstream. And one of the streams you're swimming against is all of your own conditioning, all of your cultural conditioning, the kind of the baked-in biological desire to avoid pain and move toward pleasure, the baked-in desire for fame and the fear of shame, the desire for wealth, the fear of poverty, etc., etc. You're swimming against all of that. But he said it's more than that. You're swimming against the entire culture. When you have a desire to wake up, it means you have to pause. And our culture is not about pausing and slowing down. They have the pleasure-pain thing pretty wired, if you haven't noticed. Pretty much any pain you feel, there's a drug you can take that's going to make it go away. And there's all this amazing stuff you can buy that's going to make you happy. That's kind of the basis of our culture. And as I've shared before, there's really no external thing that will make you happy except for certain Apple products. So part of the Buddha's practice was trying different techniques and then ruthlessly evaluating, did this create a more wholesome state or a less wholesome state? And I love that little teaching. Part of Buddhist philosophy or Buddhist psychology really says no one is going to save you. You have to save yourself. You have to figure this out. There are teachings, but this is not a faith-based practice. It's very scientific. Give yourself to a practice, ruthlessly evaluate. What is the end result? That's what the Buddha did, again and again and again. So it took him to the Bodhi Tree. And the Bodhi Tree, sitting in a tree, is it's very symbolic. There's sort of the roots of the tree, the tree itself, and then the space above. Kind of the axis of the world right there. And in his practice of mindfulness, of self-observation, of observing everything that moves and inquiring into the nature of reality and the nature of self, he noticed how everything is changing and how his mind, our mind, is constantly reacting to what is happening. And the reacting creates more suffering. So this is what he concluded. This is one of the translations here. The world, whose very nature is to change, is constantly determined to become something else. It is at the mercy of change. It is only happy when it is caught up in the process of change. But this love of change contains a measure of fear and insecurity, and as fear itself is suffering. So there's something about life that's very engaging. Making stuff happen. It's exciting. My guru used to tell the story of someone who was rowing a boat in a circle. And he was rowing really fast. And someone said, "Look how fast he's going." And the guru said, "Yes, but he's going in a circle." And in many ways, we're going very, very fast. We're making lots of stuff happen. And there's a certain joy, there's a certain satisfaction that comes in the drama of life. And of course, that the drama of this life is so intensely fed by the media now. It's such a overwhelming soap opera out there. And the question is, what is really true? So the Buddha was watching all of this. And he had his final confrontation. Kind of the final confrontation was with Maya. And the word Maya means delusion or illusion. And Maya is a powerful, powerful force. Little sidestep into the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna is with Krishna. Krishna was his charioteer, sort of teaching him, and they're by a little pond. And Arjuna says, "Tell me about Maya." So Krishna takes him by the back of the head, pushes his head underwater, and Arjuna is born into a body, and he's a young boy, and he goes to school, and he falls in love with a woman, and he has a family, and he has to go to war, and he's dying on the battlefield, and then Krishna pulls his head out of the water and says, "How do you like my Maya?" We so easily get caught. So, here is the Maya in his final confrontation with Buddha, with his desire to see clearly. So the first thing he does is he's these beautiful daughters, and he sends the daughters out to seduce the Buddha. And the Buddha he retains his seat, he retains his meditation practice. So then Maya sent armies and warriors, and the Buddha met all of them with his awareness, with his non-judging awareness. The capacity to name, to see it, let it be, to stay the witness. So Maya sent desire, craving. That didn't work. He sent aversion, anger, hatred. That didn't work. So he decided to pull out the big guns. And he said in this booming voice, "Who do you think you are? How audacious of you." And so the Buddha, and you may see this in some statues, where the Buddha has his hand down, touching the earth. And as he touched the earth as his witness, which is very much about acknowledging the path, acknowledging all that he had done in his journey, which is in a sense is sort of like a deserving, look what I have done. And Maya vanishes. Now Maya never vanishes completely through the Buddha's life. Maya, illusion is always there around the corner. But in that point, Maya vanishes. And the Buddha recognizes that these three main energies of greed, hatred, and delusion are the three forces that will most easily pull you away from that seat of sort of non-judging witness consciousness. Nirvana is sometimes described as a snuffing out or like a blowing out of a flame. And it wasn't that the Buddha's personality was snuffed out, but these three fires of greed and hatred and delusion were snuffed out. And these are what lies at the very root of suffering. So after the heat of that battle, there was a certain coolness that comes, kind of like after you have a fever, there's sort of like a stabilizing. And so the Buddha moved into a state of just pure resting in presence. And this, I love this sort of phase of the practice, because it sort of describes what we're seeking is sometimes described by what it is. You know, a quality of presence, a quality of being, a quality of joy, a quality of compassion or kindness. But it's also described by what it isn't. Non-judging, non-grasping. So when you just think for a moment of who you are in the absence of greed, in the absence of hatred, in the absence of delusion, there's a quality of presence, a quality of being which is already here, but simply without all the modifications, all the waves, the drama. So when we attain what we want, there can be a quality of resting in that. But then it's not over. There's a story of a hiker in Tibet. He knew a little bit of Tibetan. And he was hiking, he saw an old man carrying a whole load of wood, kind of bent over. And he stopped and they chatted, and he said, or no, actually the man, he was walking with the man, and he asked this older man, he said, what is it? What is enlightenment? What does awakening mean? And then the old man stops and he puts down his burden and he stands up and he goes, and then this younger man said, well, then what? You know, what happens after enlightenment? The old man looks at him, he smiles, he picks up his wood, and he keeps walking. So as the story goes, the Buddha for a long period of time just sort of rested in that sense of seeing clearly, of being awake. And he thought, no one is ever going to get this. No one could possibly get what I went through. Then there are a number of versions of what different traditions say. This stage is oftentimes referred to as Shakyamuni. The Shakya means that he was a descendant of the Shakya clan, and the word Muni means silent. So he was just drawn into silence. You know, nirvana cannot be described in words. It's beyond words. And he thought, not only will people get this, but it will be exhausting and disappointing to even try. But then he received a visitation, and there are lots of different stories. The mythology really kind of leads to the inner dialogue we have with ourselves. And part of the dialogue of Brahma coming to visit him, it says, look down at this world of suffering. Look at this human race that is caught in suffering. Awakening also includes compassion. And so compassion began to arise. The description of Bodhi Chitta means to be awake to what is true and to hold that in a loving heart, to hold that in presence. And so the Buddha looked down at this world of suffering from his standpoint of seeing clearly into the cause of suffering, the realization that to take human form means that suffering occurs. To recognize the root of suffering, which has at its very root a quality of clinging, a quality of identification. And the third insight being the recognition that you can let go. Whatever you're holding on to, as difficult as it may be, you can let go. And the fourth of the Noble Truths, that there are practices, there are techniques, there are guidelines that can help you to let go and to, in that letting go, to increase your capacity for joy, for kindness, and for compassion. So the Buddha engaged into teaching. His first thought, and again this is a translation, he remembered his friends that he had practiced with. And he thought, well, maybe there are some people with just a little bit of dust in their eyes. I love that phrase, a little bit of dust in their eyes. So he began to re-engage with those that he had practiced, and many people benefited in a powerful way. And so the question becomes, how do we live our lives from a place of being awake, from a place of compassion? There's an interesting model that I love. It's by John Keegan, and there are a couple layers. The first is the consciousness of what he calls the opportunist. At that level, you see something, you grab it because someone else may grab it. So, there's a certain number of our population that sort of live in that sense of, well, of course I stole the car, the keys were in it. Someone else would have taken it, And then there's another level of what's referred to as the diplomat. And this is where you exchange your freedom in order to belong. This is where 80% of us live. We exchange our freedom in order to belong. We keep the job because of the paycheck. That cool thing called auto deposit. It's amazing, isn't it? The next level is what he refers to as the expert. That you become somebody special. You develop an expertise. You become a professional. You're a politician. You're a doctor. You're a lawyer. You're a specialist. You're a manager. You're an administrator. You develop skills of expertise, and you're recognized as an expert or as a leader. So there's a certain level of satisfaction in that, but you're still part of a tribe. You're still exchanging freedom in order to belong. You just got a better deal. And what this leads to in this particular model is the next phase of the individualist. And this is where you begin to ask yourself, whose life am I living? Am I living out the life story that my parents installed in me? This is where many times there's sort of the phase where, I'll talk with some people and say, I always told myself when I was making this much money, that I'd be happy. I'm making this much money and I'm not happy. Sort of the recognition that this isn't satisfying anymore. That's a painful place. Or something that was such a vibrational match, it's no longer quite a vibrational match. And so you move into a phase of asking yourself what's most important for you. That can be a painful process. Sometimes it's short, sometimes it's very, very long. You're 40 days and nights in the desert asking, what's my purpose? What am I supposed to do? When you move through that phase, the next phase is what's referred to as the strategist, where you are doing what you love and you're also contributing at a high level. It's a very interesting thing where you are doing exactly what you love without compromise, but you're contributing in a powerful way. And that model is another level where your impact is, cultural and very large. Part of the journey that we're all on is first that call. Something's off. And then engaging into the unknown, engaging into the trials. And this is where your determination is tested, where your deepest intentions are tested, where you are constantly being barraged by aversion, by greed, by delusion. And as you persevere, there is more and more clarity, that quality of attainment. And then the question is, how do you give back from a place of fullness? One of the things I most love about engaging with people who are actively pursuing an awakened heart and an awakened mind is how the context of life shifts quite a bit. It's not uncommon, to be in a discussion with someone where I might say, "How are you doing?" And they'll say, like, "Oh, I'm working with so much frustration right now, and I got so much like fear in the background of everything I'm doing." And I find myself saying, "That's great. Wow, you're really onto something." Engaging with those who are interested in transformation is the best game in town, I think. So when things aren't going your way, that's a really good time to pay attention. There's a lot of juice in that inquiry. Let's just close just for a few moments. If you like, you can close your eyes. And deepen your breath just a little bit. And just sense this journey that you are on. What calls you forward. And just reflecting on this phrase. The goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature. And as you're ready, you can deepen the breath. And as you're ready, you can let your eyes open. Thank you for your kind listening. You may find as you are exploring matching your heartbeat with the heartbeat of the universe that you'll be aided tremendously by cookies. So we have some fuel out in the for you out in the lobby. Thank you again. I'll see you next week.